So now we're going to talk a little bit more about career interviews. So there's a solid chance that at this point you might not have done an interview yet. And it goes without saying that you're definitely going to have to do some interviewing once you finish college. So I want to teach you some of the basics. This is just very basic, but you do have a lot of opportunities to come and on campus to get more practice with interviews. Career Services on campus is an awesome resource that I want to make sure you're aware of it before your senior year. They can help you out at any point of the process. Before you graduate, I definitely suggest going to them to get help with your resume, cover letter, and doing a mock interview with them. I have done all of the following when I was a student, and let me tell you, it just really helped out. It's always good to have another set of eyes go over anything you write, but with the mock interviews, just as like I give you opportunities to practice your speech in front of me, I think it's always important to practice your interviews in front of someone else so that you can feel more comfortable when it comes to doing the actual thing when it matters. So I want to talk about things that you should always do and things that you should never do in an interview. In my position, I have gotten the opportunity to interview hundreds of candidates for job positions at the university, as well as students I used to work in the Center for Student Achievement, so I interviewed a lot of people for tutors and peer leaders. So I've gotten to see a lot of great interviews and a lot of not so great interviews. So let's start with things that you should always do for an interview. The biggest thing is be on time. If you are late, whether it's 1 minute, 10 minutes, it doesn't matter. Be early. Be 15 minutes early and be ready to go in case the interview before you finishes up. Usually with interviews, it's not just one person interviewing you. It's usually a panel or a committee of people doing interviews. So when you show up late, it's really conveying the message that your time is more important than the team's time. So it's very important to be on time and not keep anyone waiting. When you have to drive to an interview, make sure you budget enough time that you could get stuck in traffic. Whatever it might be, you want to make sure you take account for anything that could possibly happen. Next one is dress appropriately. And I have seen both sides of the spectrum. I have seen men come to an interview in a tuxedo for a teaching position. I'm not even joking. And I've also seen people come to interviews in jeans. Neither of those are appropriate. So make sure you are dressing for the job you're interviewing for. And this could be different. For example, if you are interviewing for maybe a coaching position, they might say on there specifically, dress to be able to move. That would mean you don't want to come in dress clothes. But 9 times out of 10, when you're going for a preliminary interview, they're going to ask you to dress in business casual. So make sure you know what that is. You want to make sure that your clothes are ironed and that you look put together, that your hair is in place. The big thing to me, what I think dressing appropriately is important, is that it makes you more confident when you go in there. I don't want you to have to be worried about your hair or worried about how something is fitting. Make sure you're comfortable and that you're appropriate so your mind doesn't have to even worry about the way you're looking, you're just focusing on the conversations at hand. This next one was always a go-to of shake hands. However, this is very pre-COVID. I don't really know what's going to happen after COVID. My guess is going to be that we don't go back to shaking hands, so stay tuned on that one. Always make sure to make eye contact and posture. A lot of the things that we are looking for in an interview are also things that we talk about doing in our speech. And the reason for that is that the physicality really sets a good first impression. With your speeches, you want to set that good first impression so that your audience listens to you and believes that you're credible and focuses through your whole speech. You want for the exact same reasons the interviewee to think that you are able to do this job. So really focus on eye contact, making contact with every person who is on that panel, especially when they're asking questions. If it is a Skype interview, which a lot of interviews, at least for first rounds, are Skypes right now, make sure you're looking at the camera rather than at the screen. This can be very hard to do because, you are focusing on the other person, but really focusing on that camera instead. Posture is also very important. We know that a lot can be conveyed to your audience from your posture, and I want you to have a very strong, confident stance. So avoiding things like fidgeting with your hands, playing with your pockets, twirling your hair, hunching over. Those are all things we want to avoid so we can have this really confident stance when we do our interviews. This next one might seem obvious, but answer the questions. They're asking you questions for a reason, and they're really looking for an honest response. So by taking the question that's asked and turning it into what you want them to ask, you're not really fooling the interviewer. So make sure that you listen carefully to the question. If you have any confusion about it, it's okay to ask them follow-up questions to make sure you answered it correctly, or to ask them to clarify what they're looking for at this question. The next one goes hand in hand. Make sure you get to the point. No interviewee wants to hear this long story that it takes a while to get to your point. So make sure you know what you want to get across and get that across so your interviewees are still focusing and paying attention. Sometimes when we ramble too, that's a nervous tendency, and your interviewee can spot that. Have an extra resume with you. Usually for most job interviews, you've submitted a cover letter and resume already. However, I think it's always a great idea to have in your portfolio that you bring with you a copy of your resume in case someone there doesn't have it, or there's someone who didn't get to read it ahead of time. You can have it right there, and it makes you look super prepared. The next part is being prepared. One of the big things I can say with being prepared is there are some questions that you know you're going to be asked. For example, you're usually going to be first asked to introduce yourself, so you should have an elevator pitch ready. An elevator pitch is about a 60 to 90 seconds, really closer to 60 seconds. It gets its name from riding on one floor of an elevator all the way to the top floor. And basically, you want to be able to sell yourself in those 60 seconds. So think about that. Your elevator pitch should really match your introduction. You're also going to probably be asked, why do you want to work with this company? Make sure you know enough about the company and you know why you want to work there so you can let them know. There's also some very common questions like you watched in the video previously. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Always, always, always be prepared to name both of them. It's such a common question nowadays that there's almost no excuse for not being able to bring forth a strength and a weakness. At the end of every interview, you're always going to be asked, do you have any questions for us? Make sure you have questions. They, just as much as they are interviewing you, you are interviewing them to make sure that they're a right fit for you. So this is your chance to ask any questions that you didn't get the answer to. You want to be careful not to ask questions that have been explained either in communication with the panel or in the job posting, or that you could easily find on their website. So make sure you've done your first round of research, but if there's something that you didn't understand, that would be your chance to ask it. Also, maybe you have a perfect idea of what the job is and you don't really have any clarifying questions. Ask something a little more detailed. Ask them what they look for in a successful candidate. Ask them to describe the climate of the office. Ask them about professional development opportunities. Think beyond the box. And, this is a really great place to Google questions to ask at the end of an interview, because you will find hundreds, and really just find one that you're interested in and be prepared to ask them. The final thing is to make sure that you send a thank you email or note after your interview. So once, usually you interview the day, I would say later that night, it's always a good idea just to send a personalized email thanking the people who interviewed you. Remember that, you're not the only one being interviewed, and those people have spent a lot of time interviewing people. And at the end of the day, you want to make sure you still stick out and you're still on their minds. So it's always, always, always a great idea just to send a thank you. Thank them for their time. If there's something that, you really enjoyed that they said, mention that, because it's always nice and shocking when someone recall something that you said. When you were interviewing a lot of people, you might not remember it, but when the interviewee does, that's always a great sign. So real quick, we're going to talk about things to never do. Some of these are the opposite of what was on the always do list, but over rehearsed answers. Just as I said, make sure you're prepared for some of those common answers. You want to make sure it doesn't sound like a canned response. You still want it to be very authentic and very honest. I've interviewed a lot of people who I feel like maybe watched a couple of videos on great interview answers and they just recited them, and I didn't really get a sense of who that person was, and I didn't really feel like they were an honest person, and they weren't on my top list because of that. Don't ask questions that were addressed in the job posting or easily found online. Definitely do your research. When you're asked that strength or weakness question, do not say you have no weaknesses. Everybody has weaknesses. When I hear someone, and I have heard it plenty of times, where I ask, what's your biggest weakness? And they say, I don't really think I have weaknesses. Everybody has weaknesses. The people that we like are the people who have weaknesses, and they tell us what they're doing to work on those weaknesses to make it a strength. That's what we want to hear. Don't chew gum or wear a hat. It's very unprofessional. Wearing a hat not only is it kind of considered unprofessional, but it also blocks your eyes. So you can't really see if someone's making eye contact with you. Always have questions prepared at the end. You really don't want to answer and say, I have no questions. Or like in that video we watched earlier, you don't want all your questions to be about, compensation or benefits or vacation time or asking what they will do for you. Those are questions that you can most likely find the answers for online. So I would say don't ask those questions at all. The last one is don't seem bored. I know that might sound silly, but I have seen a good majority of people I've interviewed just seem bored and uninterested in the position. It could just be nerves, but be careful that your nerves don't come off as bored. I like seeing someone with energy and someone who's passionate about what they're doing. They have a clear sense of why they want to be there and they're excited. If I see someone that's bored in the interview, what does that tell me of how they're going to be every day? Well, most likely they're probably going to be even less energetic than they are in their interview in the everyday, and we don't want to see that. All right, my time is almost up for this screencast, so I'm going to hit pause. But these are the things to always do and things to never do for a job interview.